For years, the public understanding of the Roloff family feud was fairly straightforward. We were led to believe that a standard real estate dispute tore the family apart. The accepted story was that Matt Roloff wanted a certain amount of money for the farm, his sons could not meet that price, and everyone walked away with bruised egos. I have never fully bought into that sanitized version of events. Today, I am looking at the details of what has been called the intervention from hell. This was a final, secret family meeting called by Matt, and it fundamentally changes the entire context of why this family collapsed. Based on the timeline of recent public fraud allegations and the legal trouble surrounding his fiancée Caryn, my take is that the farm sale was never about acreage or fair market value. It was about a deep, calculated financial betrayal. In this commentary, I am going to walk you through exactly what happened when Matt summoned his sons to the property, expecting them to help repair his public image. I will explain how Zach and Jeremy showed up with documentation regarding a secret Nevada LLC. I will also break down the chilling ultimatum Jeremy delivered that officially severed their relationship with their father. The boys demanded he sell the farm and pay their mother back. When Matt refused, they walked out for good. This situation represents the absolute end of the line for the Roloff patriarch. I want to examine the history, the psychology, and the financial maneuvering that brought them to this permanent estrangement. To understand the sheer weight of this final confrontation, we have to look back at the environment that produced it. Roloff Farms was never just a piece of property. It was the main character of their reality television run and the central pillar of their family identity. The show originally pitched the farm as a massive legacy project. Matt constantly talked about building this empire so his children could eventually take the reins. The kids grew up working the pumpkin patches, building forts, and believing that their sweat equity would translate into future ownership. The farm was supposed to be the glue that held them together across generations. When Matt and Amy went through their highly public divorce, the division of assets was incredibly messy. Amy eventually made the difficult choice to sell her portion of the farm back to Matt. The public assumption at the time was that Matt would hold the land in a trust or eventually pass it down to Zach or Jeremy at a fair rate that honored their lifelong contributions. That transition did not happen. Instead, the purchase negotiations with both sons imploded in a very public way. At the time, Matt went on the offensive. He used his platform in the television show to frame his sons as unreasonable and demanding. He suggested they lacked the necessary work ethic to take over the agricultural operation. Matt played the role of the disappointed, pragmatic father very effectively. Many viewers took his side during those early episodes, assuming the boys simply wanted a multi-million-dollar property handed to them without putting in the required capital. I always thought that specific narrative felt a bit too convenient for Matt. It allowed him to keep the property, keep the money, and maintain the moral high ground in the eyes of the audience. The situation shifted drastically when external pressures began to mount against Matt. The old narrative of the demanding sons stopped working when new, serious accusations started making headlines. Public fraud allegations began circulating regarding the handling of the farm's finances. Around the same time, his fiancée Caryn found herself dealing with notable legal trouble. I am not a legal expert, and I do not have all the specific court documents regarding Caryn's situation. But the timing of these events is crucial to understanding Matt's mindset. Historically, Matt is someone who desperately needs to control the story. When his public image is threatened, he looks for a shield to absorb the impact. My read on the situation is that Matt felt his legacy slipping away rapidly. The wholesome, hardworking grandfather persona was cracking under the weight of these new financial and legal controversies. He needed a unified family front to prove to the public that he was still the respected patriarch. I believe this is exactly why he called a final family meeting. He summoned Zach and Jeremy to the massive house on the farm, hoping to wrangle them into submission. I honestly think Matt assumed his sons would fall in line. He likely calculated that, despite their personal differences, His boys would protect the overall family brand because their own television incomes and public profiles were historically tied to it. He wanted to spin the narrative, play the victim regarding the fraud claims, and have his boys stand behind him in solidarity. He wanted to use them as a public relations tool. Matt vastly underestimated how much his sons had learned in their time away from the property, and he completely misjudged their willingness to play along. The meeting did not go the way Matt planned. Zach and Jeremy did not show up to offer sympathy, and they certainly did not come to listen to another lecture about the harsh realities of business. They arrived completely prepared to dismantle their father's carefully constructed narrative. According to the timeline of events surrounding this intervention, the twins came armed with actual receipts. They bypassed the usual family bickering and introduced the central piece of this confrontation, which was the revelation of a secret Nevada LLC. This is where the story shifts from a sad, common family disagreement into something much darker and more calculated. The allegation presented in that room was that Matt used a Nevada-based limited liability company to quietly hide farm assets. I want to pause and really look at what this implies on a practical level. Setting up an out-of-state LLC to hold assets is a highly deliberate action. It requires consulting lawyers, filing specific paperwork, and operating with clear intent. If these allegations are accurate, it means Matt was not just struggling to find a fair purchase price for his sons. It suggests he was actively restructuring his wealth to obscure it from his own family. More importantly, the confrontation revealed that the boys believed this financial maneuvering was done specifically to hide money that rightfully belonged to their mother. They were accusing him of orchestrating a financial betrayal against Amy, using corporate loopholes to deprive her of her rightful equity in the empire they built together. We need to consider the immense psychological impact this discovery would have on Zach and Jeremy. For years, they had to sit quietly and listen to their father call them lazy on national television. They had to watch him parade his new relationship around the property their mother helped build from the ground up. They absorbed the public criticism and the online backlash. Finding out about a covert financial vehicle designed to betray their mother is a completely different level of injury. It reframes their entire history with Matt. My guess is that Zach and Jeremy did not just stumble onto this information by accident. They likely had to untangle a very intentional web of corporate filings, or someone brought the paperwork directly to their attention. The emotional toll of investigating your own father must be staggering. You have to mourn the parent you thought you had while simultaneously building a case against the person sitting across from you. During the meeting, Zach reportedly took the lead in confronting Matt about the LLC and the hidden assets. I can only imagine the sheer tension vibrating in that room. Zach has often been the more emotionally reactive son on the show, usually wearing his heart on his sleeve. To sit across from the man who raised you and present proof of his financial deception is a brutal task. Zach made it absolutely clear that they knew everything. They knew about the asset hiding, and they understood the full extent of the betrayal against Amy. This was the exact moment the power dynamic in the family permanently shifted. Matt could no longer hide behind the excuse of wanting a fair market value for his real estate. The boys had stripped away the confusing business jargon and exposed the underlying deception for what it was. We also have to consider Amy's position in all of this. While she was not reportedly in the room during this specific intervention, her presence was felt in every single accusation. Amy spent decades building the Roloff brand. She managed the emotional labor of the family while Matt chased his grand architectural visions. Seeing her son step up to defend her financial rights is a profound shift in the family hierarchy. The boys were stepping into the role of protectors, a role Matt had completely abandoned. Matt's immediate reaction to being cornered with this documentation was to fall back on his oldest defense mechanism. He tried to justify his actions by classifying them as standard business practices. I find this behavioral pattern incredibly telling. Whenever Matt is backed into a corner or called out for questionable behavior, He separates his identity as a father from his identity as a businessman. He uses the concept of business as a blanket excuse for unethical or emotionally destructive choices. It is a highly convenient way to avoid taking any real emotional responsibility. If hiding assets from your ex-wife and lying to your children is just a corporate strategy, then you never have to apologize. You just have to claim that your family does not understand the complexities of the corporate world. He likely tried to explain away the Nevada LLC as a simple tax strategy or a normal way to protect his portfolio. The problem is that this excuse simply does not work when the people sitting across from you are your own flesh and blood. Zach and Jeremy grew up inside Matt's business operations. They know exactly how he operates, how he negotiates, and how he views money. They were no longer buying the idea that corporate maneuvering was an acceptable substitute for familial loyalty. They saw right through the corporate speak. For decades, Matt used the promise of the farm to keep his kids close, treating them like eager employees. When it came time to actually share the wealth, he treated them like hostile competitors. The boys finally recognized that the business excuse was just a shield for his own selfishness. This complete breakdown in communication brings us to the climax of the meeting, which I consider to be the most shocking aspect of the entire ordeal. The intervention spiraled completely out of control as Matt stubbornly refused to take accountability for the financial documents. It was at this point that Jeremy delivered the final, fatal blow to the relationship. Jeremy is often perceived by viewers as the more analytical, reserved brother. He tends to distance himself from the loudest, most immediate drama, often choosing to step away rather than engage in a screaming match. For him to step up in this moment and issue the ultimate demand shows just how fractured the foundation had become. Jeremy looked his father directly in the eye and delivered a very clear, chilling ultimatum. He told Matt, "You sell the farm, pay mom what you stole, or you never see your grandchildren again." I need to spend a significant amount of time unpacking that specific sentence because it carries an incredible amount of weight. Every single phrase in that ultimatum is designed to dismantle Matt's control. It is a masterclass in establishing a hard, unbreakable boundary. The boys were no longer asking for a fair deal on the farmhouse. They were no longer asking for a place at the table. They were flipping the entire table over and walking out the door. Let us look at the first part of Jeremy's demand. You sell the farm. Demanding that Matt liquidate the property is a direct, calculated attack on Matt's ego. The farm is Matt's entire identity. It is his kingdom, his television set, and his primary source of public validation. Telling him to sell it is essentially telling him that his reign as the patriarch is officially over. The boys recognized that the land had become toxic. As long as Matt held on to the acreage, he would use it to manipulate the people around him. By demanding a sale, Jeremy was trying to remove the weapon Matt used to control the family dynamic. The second part of the quote is equally revealing. Jeremy demanded that Matt pay mom what you stole. This is a demand for absolute restorative justice. I think it is crucial to highlight that the boys were not asking for a cut of the money for themselves. They were not using this meeting to secure their own future inheritance or to get a better deal on a parcel of land. They were acting strictly as their mother's advocates. They wanted the financial wrong righted. Calling it a theft directly to Matt's face removes all the polite reality television terminology. They did not call it a misunderstanding or a bad contract. They called it stealing. They demanded that Amy be compensated for the equity that was allegedly hidden in the out-of-state LLC. This proves that the sons had fully aligned with their mother, leaving Matt completely isolated on his side of the divorce fallout. The third part of the ultimatum is the one that finalizes the severance. Threatening to withhold the grandchildren is the nuclear option in any family dispute. I have thought a lot about why Jeremy would go to that extreme. My guess is that Jeremy and Zach realized over the course of the meeting that Matt does not value human relationships the same way they do. Matt values leverage. He values control. He views interactions as transactions. The only leverage the boys had left, The only thing Matt could not buy, manipulate, or hide in a shell company was access to their children. They decided to use the one currency Matt could not counterfeit. Using the grandchildren as a consequence is a massive escalation. It means the boys determined that Matt's influence was actively harmful to the next generation. They did not want their kids growing up as props in Matt's ongoing public relations campaigns. When faced with this profound demand, Matt refused. He was given a clear path to redemption, albeit a very painful and expensive one. He chose to protect his pride, his assets, and his LLC over a relationship with his descendants. He could not bring himself to admit fault, sell his beloved kingdom, and make Amy whole financially. By refusing the terms of the ultimatum, Matt sealed his own fate. He made the final choice that ended his family. I want to look at this situation from another perspective for a moment. Engaging with the other side of this dispute is necessary because human relationships are rarely entirely black and white. There is a very valid question to be asked here regarding the boys' tactics. Did Zach and Jeremy go too far? Using your children as leverage in a financial dispute with your parents is an incredibly harsh tactic. Some people looking at this situation might argue that the grandchildren should never be used as pawns, regardless of what the grandfather did with his bank accounts. A charitable interpretation of Matt's behavior might suggest that he genuinely believed his financial planning was standard legal protection. People who amass significant wealth often use LLCs and complex tax structures to manage liability. It is entirely possible, though I personally find it unlikely, that Matt saw the Nevada entity purely as a standard wealth management tool and not as a malicious weapon against Amy. Furthermore, people who defend Matt often point out that he is the one who took the massive financial risk to build Roloff Farms in the first place. From a strictly legal standpoint, if he bought Amy out of her share during the divorce settlement, he might feel he owes her nothing more. He might view his son's demands as entitled meddling in adult affairs they do not fully understand. If you view Matt solely through the lens of a self-made property owner, his refusal to let his sons dictate his real estate portfolio makes logical sense. It is his land, and he has the right to refuse to sell it to anyone. I can completely understand why some viewers might feel uncomfortable with the boys' aggressive approach. Reality television has a strange way of blurring the lines between private family boundaries and public drama. When your entire life is monetized for an audience, the line between a genuine emotional boundary and a dramatic power play becomes very difficult to identify. I do not know for sure if Jeremy and Zach felt conflicted about weaponizing their kids in that room. I do not have enough info to say if they debated this tactic beforehand or if Jeremy blurted it out in a moment of pure adrenaline and frustration. It is entirely possible that the pressure of the cameras, the public scrutiny, and the ongoing show production amplified their reactions. When a family communicates primarily through television storylines, every argument feels like a battle for the public's favor. Some critics might say that by walking away and cutting off access to the kids, the boys are just perpetuating the cycle of punishment and control that they learned from their dad. I acknowledge that this is a highly complex dynamic, and placing all the blame squarely on one person oversimplifies decades of shared family baggage. The twins are adults, and they made a conscious choice to drop a nuclear bomb on the relationship. When Matt realized he could no longer control his sons, he likely experienced what many people refer to as a narcissistic collapse. I am not diagnosing him medically, but the behavioral patterns of intense self-focus are hard to ignore. When someone who believes they are the hero of their own story is suddenly presented with undeniable proof that they are the villain, their reaction is rarely an apology. It is usually defensiveness, anger, and retreat. Matt could not process the idea that his sons saw him as a thief. To accept Jeremy's terms would mean accepting that his entire public persona was a lie, would mean admitting that the secret corporate structures were not clever business moves, but moral failures. For a man who has spent decades curating a specific image for millions of viewers, That level of self-reflection is practically impossible. He chose the comfort of his denial over the discomfort of accountability. He would rather sit alone on a tractor and blame his sons for being ungrateful than look in the mirror and acknowledge the damage he caused. This inability to self-reflect is the true tragedy of the Roloff family. Despite acknowledging those complications, I always come back to the core issue of trust and manipulation. I truly think Matt forced his sons into a corner where they felt they had no other viable options. You cannot repeatedly prioritize your own public image and your own wealth over the well-being of your family and expect them to stick around forever. Matt treated his family members like expendable employees when it suited his business goals, and he treated them like disobedient subordinates when it suited his ego. My read is that Matt's refusal of the ultimatum was the most honest thing he has ever done. In that fleeting moment, when presented with a stark choice between his money and his grandchildren, he chose the money. He chose the farm. He chose himself. It is a tragic outcome, but it is the only outcome that makes logical sense given his well-documented history of self-preservation. The intervention from hell did not destroy the family. It merely exposed the destruction that had already taken place behind the scenes. The resulting estrangement is absolute. The image of Zach and Jeremy walking out of that room, leaving Matt completely alone in his massive, custom-built house, is the true finale of this family's story. All the acreage in Oregon cannot buy back the loyalty he squandered over the years. I do not think this is a situation that can ever be repaired with a public apology tour or a newly negotiated season of television. The bridge is completely burned to the ground, and Matt is the one holding the match. He built an empire meant for his children, only to lock them out of the gates when they demanded honesty. The farm stands empty, a monument to a patriarch who won the real estate negotiation but lost absolutely everything else in the process.